So I remember when I was young, I was noticing how older people often repeat themselves. Don't remember what story they've told and tell it again and again. Now I feel like I've reached that age where I don't remember which stories I've told, but I know I've told them before. Um, anyway, and the same thing when I was just sitting in meditation, I sort of realized what I wanted to talk about, and I thought, gee, have I talked about this before? Then I thought, it's kind of the nature of hearing the Dharma that you hear the same thing over and over, right? But in any moment, it can strike a different place. It can strike a different note. I say it a little differently. You hear it a little differently. It's always a beginner kind of experience. So what I was sort of feeling drawn to talk about a little tonight is having faith in awareness, which sounds rather odd to say. People often talk about other things with faith. They don't necessarily talk about awareness, trusting its power and its ability to transform. And that happens on really the simplest level. And I spoke a little bit about that during the meditation. I spoke about how to relate to whatever arises in the meditation. And I use the word rest, to rest with whatever arises. And I meant rest with awareness, with whatever arises. I didn't mean doze off. But it's so much a part of the mind to believe that we have to solve everything we perceive as problems. And so when something like aversion arises in the mind, when you just don't like what's happening, you don't like somebody you're with, you're sort of overtaken by all these thoughts that are full of judgment and dislike. On the one hand, it's easy to just blend with that and believe them all and think that the things that you're disliking are actually dislikable. And the situation really is intolerable and so forth. So that's one option, is to just believe all those thoughts and believe the perceptual lens, the lens that you're looking through. The other, which kind of often I think happens with people who end up in groups like these of a spiritual nature, there's often, presented certain ways for us to be that are better. The Buddhist word for better is wholesome, more wholesome, less suffering. And so somewhere along the line, you get the sense that aversion is suffering, which it indeed is. It's always suffering. It always has an unpleasant feeling tone to it. Now, sometimes we can pretend it has a pleasant feeling tone when we've just said something really nasty. It can be this sort of pleasure of, kind of vanquishing an enemy. But if you feel very deeply, if you have much sensitivity at all, you'll often notice it's a very, very shallow kind of pleasure. It's mostly aversive. It's mostly the heart is kind of boiling and unhappy. So we notice that come up in us. And, we want to do something about it. And in meditation, we present a radical idea, which is that you can do nothing about it. That's an option. That's actually doing something about it, is to not doing anything about it, accept, hold it in awareness. And that's much harder than it sounds, holding something in awareness. We very easily get drawn into the thoughts. We very easily see, we start seeing through that lens. So it's hard to hold. Or we try to hold it away by disliking it, disapproving of it, like I shouldn't be thinking this. And it may not occur to us to actually relax back and to trust awareness, to just notice, oh, this is an aversive state. What's being felt here? There's maybe a sense of defensiveness, sense of wound, sense of judgment. What is there? Just become curious. Just notice it. Feel it in the body. It's a huge part of human experience. And if you want to contemplate reality, it's not a bad thing to contemplate aversion, because it's a huge part of reality. It's a huge part of political reality. Oh my goodness, how much aversion is thrown back and forth. How much each side wants to frame the other as bad, disgusting, so forth. And to draw us into that. Such a common tool to gather people together is to gather them around what they dislike, don't like, have a strong feeling of dislike toward, or threat. It's such a huge part of human experience. And it's such a radical thing to just notice it, not to condemn it. To notice it and to notice its suffering, which is just a part of noticing it. It's not something separate from noticing it. It's noticing the discomfort of it. Sometimes it's so important to notice this. Many people have an aversion to conflict arising with someone else. I certainly do. My kind of personality tendency is more toward pleasing people. And so if I feel like there's in conflict, something wants to run away. Anybody else like that out there? Many of us. So that's also about aversion. Feel conflict arise, and to not like it, to be afraid of it, fear is a form of aversion. And we turn away from it, try to avoid it. So in this case, kind of holding aversion becomes very important, because a life of never being able to engage in a conflict or acknowledge it is a very difficult life. We'll get in a lot of difficulty that way. And sometimes just feeling your feelings raises a lot of aversions. If, say, you don't want to feel grief, don't want to feel loss, often aversion comes in its place, kind of pushing away. So this kind of holding of experience just the way it is so powerful. Get to know that. And I'm bringing it up in the context of the word faith, because there's a kind of trust that it involves, trust awareness. And trust its ability to hold us in experience, especially difficult experience. You could think of it as a refuge. Sometimes in Buddhism, we talk about the Buddha as a refuge. Take refuge in the Buddha. What does that actually mean? It means take refuge in awareness. Take refuge in the capacity to be present in the midst of something difficult, unpleasant, aversive. Another circumstance that occurs to me also is important for us to hold. It kind of goes along with conflict, but in any given situation, there are just a whole variety of perspectives that people can take on it. And that's confusing. Often we want to have just one perspective. We want to know what's what. We want to know the truth. We want to see it this way, or that's our opinion. And it's very difficult to hold the tension of two opinions that disagree. Again, it's the conflict thing, but I'm giving it a particular spin, a particular flavor. And sometimes that exists even in us. Sometimes we have multiple opinions inside of us. We don't know where to land. And to actually be present with that experience of more than one perspective. I sometimes refer to, how can I put it? Sometimes I think of my mother's religion, my mother's true religion. I have a lot to thank my mother for. I consider her my first spiritual teacher. But she thought that questions were holy. And she actually learned that in an odd way. She was raised Roman Catholic. She was Roman Catholic her whole life. She developed this love of Judaism. And one of the things she took from Judaism and made her love it was the way the questions and questioning were valued. And so she kind of took that mantle, I think, inside. It became a bit of her religion, was sacredness of questions, of being able to ask about any perspective, and the ability to hold more than one opinion in one's mind at the same time as you're talking with someone and they have a different opinion. How to kind of hold that in your own at the same time. What does that take? It takes faith, I think. It takes a trust in the truth that one doesn't have to necessarily think that one's own opinion is the total truth. If you do, there's often some fear in there mixed in. You don't actually completely trust it. There's something about, her ability to talk to people she disagreed with without getting ruffled, without getting condescending, without getting angry, without making them bad in any way, that I have such admiration for. She had a faith, a trust in something that was beyond just her own opinion. You could call it the space of opinions, where opinions arise, where opinions are argued, where opinions perhaps are modified in the light of what someone else sees, as you start to see it through their point of view. And I think, it's very much similar to the faith that I'm pointing to, which is a faith in awareness. There's so much contradictory that arises inside of us, much less around us, in terms of how people look at things, a lot of diversity, a lot of potential conflict. But even within ourselves, so many parts of ourselves that see things differently. I mentioned, a part of me that tends to like to please people. But then there's another part of me that comes up and is angry about that, angry about maybe someone else or myself. So we're constantly having these different states pop up in us that You don't necessarily see things in the same way. Part of me is very sympathetic. And that same kind of angry part sometimes comes up and says, don't be sympathetic with that. Don't tolerate that. And so, within just this human being, there are many moments of actually holding diversity, holding inner diversity inside. It's possible in one heart to have both arrogance and inferiority. Isn't that interesting? They seem to be opposites. And part of what I love about the meditative path, as particularly articulated in Vipassana, is the training that it gives. The training that it gives in holding awareness in the presence of everything that arises. And my sense of the meditative path is very much one of relaxing back into awareness, in letting certain things go. It's not a passive state, which is kind of a surprise. It's not just like not doing anything, because then when you do this, when you begin to rest, sometimes you find yourself spontaneously saying something or doing something or intervening without a whole lot of thought from a very authentic place. And that's surprising. It's not the passivity that one might think. Neither is it the way that I might more egoically struggle with things and situations and people. It's kind of a paradox. So we learn this trust. Sitting is a powerful practice that way. Sitting with our feelings. I just today had something come up where someone said something. It wasn't actually about me. It was about themselves, someone that said something to them. And it just set something off inside of me. And I think you all know this experience where you're kind of like getting upset at someone you've never met based on somebody's report of a comment that they made. And it took a while for me to kind of begin to realize what was happening and to come back to just presence. Oh, yeah, this is aversion. Oh, you're taking this personally. This wasn't even said to you. It was said to somebody else and reported to you. And something is you is taking it personally. Just noticing that. And somehow, just that simple noticing, oh, I'm taking this personally. I think it means something about me, was enlightening in a little sense, in the little e, enlightening sense. It was just a moment of waking up. And suddenly there was a little bit of freedom around the experience, around the mind. And the mind dove into it a couple more times. But already kind of the jig was up and something kind of began to settle. So in a sense, that's doing something about it, but it's not trying to make it go away. I've done that. I've tried to make mind states go away. It doesn't work very well. Have you tried it? It doesn't work very well. But this just showing up with this simple, like noticing the truth. What's the truth here? Oh, I feel threatened. I'm taking this personally. oh, you know, something kind of begins to rest. So taking refuge in that, taking refuge in awareness. Avoiding whatever that is that would just kind of seize control in the moment and wrestle with it. Instead, don't resist. It's a non resistant kind of just awareness, intelligent awareness. And I think this is actually how the heart intelligence works. It's different than the mind intelligence. The heart intelligence works when we actually trust awareness.